The Victorian era, spanning from the early 19th century to the beginning of the 20th century, was characterized by strict social norms and elaborate fashion. One aspect of daily life that might appear particularly puzzling to modern observers is how Victorian women managed their toileting needs while adorned in those massive, puffy dresses. To comprehend this, we must delve into the fascinating world of Victorian fashion, hygiene practices, and the tools and techniques they employed. How they answered nature's call in puffy dresses. In the early Victorian era, life in Britain vastly differed from our modern comforts. The concept of indoor plumbing and modern toilets as we know them today was non-existent. Instead, people of that era relied on some rather intriguing methods for their personal sanitation needs. Imagine a time when sewers and flushing toilets were yet to grace the landscape of Victorian England. Europeans, in general, were not even acquainted with the concept of a toilet as we understand it today. The phrase, "when you gotta go, wasn't just a saying, it was a way of life. In those days, nature's call was answered in open fields behind a tree or within the confines of their own homes. While men had the convenience of simply lowering their trousers, women faced a unique challenge. They donned large, puffy dresses, often crafted from heavy fabrics such as silk, satin, and velvet. The question looms, how did they manage their toileting requirements while adorned in such cumbersome attire? The answer lay in the trusty chamber pot. Chamber pots, those small portable containers designed for urination and defecation, became essential fixtures. These vessels found their homes under beds or within cupboards, offering a discreet option for nighttime necessities or those inconvenient daytime urges. In multi-story buildings, especially where descending to an outhouse seemed impractical, chamber pots became day-to-day companions. Their contents would later be transferred to larger containers or buckets, which were emptied into pits or latrines. In this era, even the wealthiest families often had outhouses tucked away in their backyards or gardens. These small standalone structures, essentially wooden sheds with a hole in the ground, served exclusively for defecation. However, without running water or toilet paper, people had to bring their water and make do with newspapers or alternative materials for personal hygiene. The waste in these outhouses accumulated in pits or latrines, attended to by the labor of night soilmen. Public toilets, known as private houses or privies, offered additional options. Typically situated in bustling areas like marketplaces or public parks, these facilities were constructed either by local authorities or private enterprises. Unfortunately, these restrooms were often far from pristine. Irregular cleaning and improper waste disposal contributed to their unsanitary conditions. In this era, personal hygiene took a backseat to practicality. Regular baths or showers, so common today, were infrequent. Undergarments often went unchanged for days. Consequently, the unpleasant odors associated with the lack of modern sanitation were a constant presence in daily life. During the Napoleonic and English Civil Wars, government officials embarked on an unusual practice, going door to door to collect the contents of people's chamber pots. This seemingly peculiar endeavor was driven by the critical need for urine, a valuable resource refined to produce saltpeter, an indispensable ingredient in the manufacture of gunpowder. In those times, women and ladies were adorned in crinolines, garments characterized by multiple layers, including a lengthy shift, and more than 2 tiers of petticoats, all crowned by an overskirt and bodice. With this abundance of fabric swirling around, the necessity for knickers simply did not arise. Ladies moved about freely without such undergarments. It wasn't until the later Victorian era, marked by the occasional overturning of the massive bell cage of a crinoline in strong winds, that the addition of drawers became advisable to shield a lady's modesty. In its early form, drawers featured 2 separate legs joined solely at the upper level, extending from the waist to the backside. These undergarments were crotchless, featuring only overlapping cotton fabric in the lower region, which parted when one squatted down. This design accommodated the need for using a bedpan without the arduous task of lifting layers upon layers of clothing. So how did women manage their toileting needs using chamber pots? Due to the absence of knickers or drawers, these pots were designed to be held up beneath the skirts rather than used conventionally by squatting over them. They often had an oval shape as opposed to the round chamber pot, and some even had indented sides to fit snugly between the thighs. On occasion, ladies would place a chamber pot on the floor, lift their skirts, and step over the pot to squat down. In social settings or events, ladies would retire to specially designated rooms where multiple chamber pots were available, often assisted by maids. A lady's maid would lift her skirts and position a chamber pot to facilitate the process. Following this, a swift cleaning with a wet cloth was administered, or alternative materials such as old newspapers, leaves, or corn cobs were employed, an aspect we'll dive into further shortly. Between the layers of their attire, ladies wore a linen shift, a garment chosen for its ease of cleaning, which was likely changed daily, possibly with each change of outfit. Maids and servants adopted less cumbersome attire. Privacy was not a significant concern during this period, particularly for toileting functions. In less affluent households, people would frequently share such spaces, as dedicated water closets for all were a relatively recent development. In social settings, men attending balls or dinners might simply retire to the garden for convenience. Curiously, one of the more popular wiping implements of the early Victorian era was the dried corn cob. This unique tool is operated by turning on its axis to facilitate cleaning. Another option was the sea sponge, a fixed to a handle and rinsed in a bucket of salt water or vinegar after each use. Interestingly, early humans utilized rocks, dirt, and clay for hygiene, suggesting that the concept of comfort was not a primary consideration at the time. Various other objects were also employed, including leaves, handfuls of straw, and even seashells. As the availability of paper increased, early Victorians began using newspapers, catalogs, and magazines for this purpose. Notably, patents related to toilet paper began to emerge in the late 1800s. However, it was not until the early 1900s that toilet paper began to be mass-produced in the familiar form we know today. Victorian women's menstrual challenges and adaptive solutions. Throughout history, women faced tough challenges and adapted well. The Victorian era, known for its strict rules and customs, was no different. Victorian women had a practical approach to dealing with their monthly periods, but also had to follow society's strict rules. To start, it's worth noting that Victorian women had fewer menstrual cycles compared to their modern counterparts, and this was attributed to several factors. Firstly, although the onset of puberty then, typically between the ages of 12 and 14, wasn't significantly different from today, women reached menopause earlier, often in their mid-30s. Secondly, a considerable number of medieval women experienced irregular periods due to poor nutrition and the physical demands of labor. Despite these challenges, they needed to manage menstruation without the convenience of contemporary feminine hygiene products. So how did they navigate this monthly ordeal? In the Victorian era, undergarments, as we know them today, were notably absent from women's wardrobes. Instead, a woman's shift served as her foundational undergarment, primarily safeguarding her outer dress from bodily oils and stains. When a woman encountered her period, she turned to a garment that resembled a modern-day bikini bottom, aptly named the tea bandage. This special garment was lined with rags, though for impoverished women, it might be padded with moss or some other absorbent fiber. Most women meticulously laundered these rags after each use, storing them for the next month's cycle. Astonishingly, accounts suggest that these makeshift menstrual pads were changed anywhere from 12 to 20 times a day, reflecting the determination and resourcefulness of Victorian women. For lighter days, alternatives included wearing thicker petticoats for absorption. Although split-crotch drawers were introduced, they offered minimal protection during menstruation. During the late 19th century, a ray of progress shone upon the menstrual landscape with the introduction of disposable sanitary pads made from cellulose. These pads offered improved comfort and hygiene compared to their cloth or sheepskin counterparts. However, they remained relatively expensive and were not readily accessible to all. Consequently, Many women persisted with cloth or alternative materials due to financial constraints. The physical discomfort and pain associated with menstruation were yet another challenge Victorian women confronted. Cramps, bloating, and headaches plagued many during their periods, offering limited relief options. Hot water bottles, warm baths, and herbal remedies were common remedies, although some resorted to opium and other narcotic drugs despite their adverse effects and addictive nature. As if these challenges weren't formidable enough, Victorian women had to contend with the prevailing belief that menstruation was a sign of moral weakness and emotional instability. Society dictated that women should conceal their menstrual cycles, stifling both physical and emotional expression during this time. This suppression of emotions and the lack of support for women experiencing difficult periods added yet another layer to their struggle. Nonetheless, amidst these trials, there were glimmers of progress. In the late 19th century, a wave of scientific inquiry led doctors and scientists to study the menstrual cycle comprehensively. This newfound understanding paved the way for better menstrual products and treatments, offering a ray of hope in an otherwise challenging era for women's menstrual health. How dresses were laundered and preserved. Dresses in the Victorian era underwent a different laundering process than our modern clothes. Washing them was a significant endeavor, nothing like our routine washing today. It occurred just twice a year, a monumental task known as the Great Wash. Soap and water were not the primary cleansing agents. Instead, a distinctive method was employed. These garments were sprinkled with talcum powder, not soaked in soapy water as we do today. After the powder application, they were meticulously brushed to remove both the powder and the lingering scent of body odor. This process aimed to refresh the garments, replacing the unwanted odor with the fragrance of talcum powder. However, this cleansing ritual was infrequent, making the clothing's longevity and odor management essential. When these dresses weren't in use, they found refuge either hanging in cedar-lined closets or neatly folded within cedar trunks. Cedar served as a natural deterrent against pests, particularly moths, ensuring the preservation of these remarkable garments. Despite their superb quality in construction materials and design, Victorian clothing faced two extremes. They were either worn until they became nearly translucent or reached a state of unpleasant odor that was simply intolerable. Beneath these elaborate dresses, a hidden world of undergarments existed. Layers upon layers of foundation garments, including chemises, slips, hoop skirts, shifts, crinolines, and petticoats were worn to protect the outer garments. These foundational layers were more suitable for hand washing with robust soap and water to maintain their cleanliness and integrity. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Remember to subscribe to this channel, hit the like button, and share the video.